Okay. Well, hello, Susan, and hello to anyone who's hopping on belatedly or watching the recording. I'm Dr. Jennea Wood. I'm a naturopathic physician with Temple Natural Health in Lacey, although we do a lot of telemedicine as well. And I work with all sorts of inflammatory conditions, lots of autoimmune conditions, thyroid, chronic fatigue, mold illness, all sorts of things. And um, just first want to say, if you have questions along the way, feel free to just either shout them out or type them into the chat. Happy to stop and answer questions all along the way. And um, I will just jump in. So I was inspired to develop this class because chronic inflammation is so rampant, and it's affecting so many people's health. And I think it's useful to understand why our bodies create it in the first place. It does actually have a purpose, and then why it gets out of control. So the purpose of inflammation is to heal from an injury or a surgery, and to fight off infections. So very important tasks. Inflammation is a cascade of events that occurs in the body, created by the immune system with the goal of fighting off an infection or producing healing. And so, an example would be the flu, getting the flu. So, you might develop a fever, body aches, fatigue. Uh, your appetite might go away. You might be irritable or have a lot of malaise, which is like medical term for just feeling sick. And the symptoms are not actually caused by the flu virus. They are caused by your immune system using a whole bunch of complex chemical signals to create inflammation to fight the flu virus. Um, and so sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, I never ever get sick." And um, you know, I've had many people tell me they go many, many years without ever having a cold or a flu. And when I hear this, I actually it kind of makes me worry a little bit about their health because it's unlikely that they went years and years and years without ever encountering a cold or a flu virus. Hello to the people hopping on. We got started just a couple minutes ago, but we're just barely into the class, and then we are recording it. So if you want to um, like change the name you have listed, or if you want to do anything for privacy purposes, you can go ahead and do that. And then also, I will just pause and say I'm going to send out an email um, within the next few days, once I can get the recording from Monica and your email addresses, you won't ever get any other emails from me or my clinic unless you sign up to receive them. But I'll send out one message that has the link to the recording and a few resources that we're talking about in the class, and some discount codes if you want to try anything we talked about. A lot of what we talk about will just be like knowledge. So, but there'll be a couple products that are just what I tend to use. So keep an eye out for that email. And all right, I will keep going. So we're talking about an example of inflammation, how it's sort of used naturally in the body, getting the flu. So when I hear that people have never ever gotten sick, or not never ever, but don't get sick often at all, maybe like haven't had a cold or a flu in 5 years or more, I take that typically as a sign that their immune system is not responding appropriately to cold or flu viruses that they're encountering. Not that they haven't gotten a cold or a flu. And that's actually not a good thing because um, if your immune system, if you don't ever develop any symptoms, there probably are still viruses that you're being exposed to, some of which can kind of like take up residence in your system, and your immune system isn't kicking them out properly like it should be. So that both there are certain types of viruses that then can go kind of chronic. And then also it can be a sign that the immune system just isn't working that well. And that having really low immune function actually is a risk for cancer. Um, so it's not a given that one would get cancer, but one of the immune system's jobs is to kill cancer cells when they arise. And so it's actually really important to have like a healthy, functional, robust immune response for that reason, as well as kicking out viruses that we encounter. So most healthy people actually get 1 to 2 colds per year, and sometimes, on average, get the flu every 5 to 10 years. And I think of it kind of like immune system exercise or house cleaning. So your body is just sort of like creating this response, cleaning house, clearing out infections. Having a fever once in a while is actually incredibly beneficial. It does a lot of good for kind of clearing out metabolic waste, killing off cancer cells, killing autoimmune cells. Sometimes people will have warts for many, many years, and then they'll get the flu, and their warts will be gone after that. So it's like this sort of house cleaning thing, warts being caused by a virus that just kind of sits around and um, doesn't, it's kind of hard for our immune systems to deal with it in typical times. And then during a fever, oftentimes your body will just sort of like deal with it all at once. So, I'm going to touch on a little bit of like just um, kind of barely go over a little bit of the chemical signaling that's going on, and this is not necessary to memorize, but I think it's kind of interesting, and you can just, um, move on through if it's if it's not interesting to you. So the chemical signals, or some of the main ones that produce a fever, are called interleukin 1 and TNF alpha. And those, your immune system makes those, your white blood cells make those, and that tells your body to raise the temperature of your entire body. The reason for that is that when our bodies are at a higher temperature, like say 102 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, our own immune cells actually work more efficiently at that temperature. But viruses and bacteria don't work as well at that temperature, don't divide as readily. So, really, really helpful for fighting infections. Body aches are typically caused by a chemical signal called interleukin 6, a small amount of IL-6 or interleukin 6. Um, so in the proper amount, it makes a little bit of muscle tissue in your muscles break down to release amino acids, which are the protein building blocks. And we need those amino acids during an illness or injury to um, to use in the fight against the infection or in healing. So it just sort of um, frees up some amino acids. However, we get body aches when that happens because there's a little bit of muscle breakdown happening. So, for example, during a flu, sometimes people get like terrible body aches, and that's why. Um, we often lose our appetite during an infection, and so that's caused by two different chemical signals called IL-18 and also TNF alpha, actually. Um, and so that's also on purpose. Your body is engaged in fighting off the flu virus, and digesting foods takes a lot of energy. And so your body is basically saying, like, don't put any food down
Mm.
here right now. We're doing other things. Like, we don't have the resources to deal with that. Um, it is important to note that if you're not hungry during an acute illness like a flu, that's a really useful thing to pay attention to. And it's best to just drink water or broth or tea and to fast. Otherwise, typically people will heal faster if they do that. If you are hungry, it's okay to eat. But if your appetite's gone, it's best to listen to that and not to like make yourself eat or make your kid eat if they have a fever and they're like, I have no appetite. And then finally, again, TNF alpha, that's a big chemical signal that our bodies use, causes fatigue and weakness as well. And that again is essentially your body like sending this very strong message, like sit down, be calm, don't go to the gym, don't do a bunch of tasks. Like your body needs that energy to fight off this virus. So it's essentially um, strong signaling telling your body to conserve energy.
Can
So,
I ask a question?
of course.
So they recommend the flu vaccine. I think it's twice a year, maybe, for people over a certain age,
Yeah.
myself included. Um, should one skip that and get the flu to have the benefit
Um,
of the
I
things we're
don't
talking
know
about?
that. Well, so that's a really big discussion. I don't, I'm not gonna say like don't get vaccines. Um, it is sort of a cost benefit analysis, like someone who is having ailing health or comorbid conditions, fighting, like dealing with cancer or lung disease or something where the flu is more likely to be detrimental, then I think doing whatever you need to do to decrease your chances. It depends on the year how effective the flu vaccine is. Some years it's like 17%, other years it's like 50, 60%. Um, they're having to predict what strains of flu will be coming around like a year
Right.
ahead of time. And so that's hard. And so there's a lot of variability in how effective it is. So I think it can absolutely be helpful. And, there's some um, variability there in how helpful. I don't think it's, you know, I wouldn't say like try to go get a fever. There have been like really intense natural physicians in years gone by who have done treatments to cause a fever to try to treat things like cancer. I am not
Mhm.
I'm not trying to convince anybody to do that. It is like it's an interesting thing to like read about because it helped people learn somewhat about the role that fever has in killing cancer cells. It's not like something that we should all be trying to do though. So I don't
Okay,
know if
thank
that,
you.
I wouldn't try to go get a fever, but if it happens, I hear a lot of people talk about getting a cold like it's a personal failing or getting the flu like it's a personal failing. And I think it's like a good paradigm shift is like, if and when it happens, it's not a personal failing. There's some good that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Dr. Wood, we have another question in the chat,
yes.
if that's
Oh,
all
thank
right. What
you.
about saunas for raising body temperature?
Really, really wonderful. Actually, thank you for bringing that up. That's probably the more the better way to go to like get a little bit of that type of benefit without like going out and trying to get sick. Um, yeah, saunas both kind of mimic exercise. So for someone who can't exercise for whatever reason, due to injury or disability or something like that, saunas in the cardiovascular system kind of mimic exercise, and then also, yeah, kind of mimic a fever. And there are boatloads of research on how beneficial saunas are for reducing all-cause mortality, like death from any cause. So yes, I am a huge fan of saunas. Um, so proper fever care, when in doubt, contact your doctor, and a naturopathic doctor is going to be able to like guide you on this type of approach more so if that's if you're interested in receiving that kind of care. Um, I typically say only use fever reducers like Tylenol if the fever is getting dangerously high. Of course, there are exceptions, which would be 104 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. There are exceptions to that, and that's why like working with a doctor is really, really important. Um, if the person is not able to stay hydrated or has a seizure, then like throw the 104 degree Fahrenheit kind of uh, rule out of the window and like get the fever down. But in a healthy person who's otherwise doing fine and can drink plenty of water and is, doing okay, letting the fever run its course as long as it doesn't get too high can have a lot of health benefits. Definitely stay home and rest. Taking fever reducers and then, going to school or going to work doesn't it makes you more contagious because the fever was helping to suppress the virus and now you've taken away the fever, but you still have the virus. So not good. Not a kind move for your fellow humans. Um, and then try do your best to fast if at all possible, unless you're just really hungry. Um, Most people with a high fever are not going to be hungry at all, and so just listening to that body signal is good. But do have plenty of fluids, water, broth, or herbal tea. And if you have a lower, like a very low fever, and you do feel hungry, you can eat, just keep it kind of minimal and like cooked vegetables, like things that are easy to digest. So, let's see, what if you can't sleep because of the fever? Um, I mean, if at all possible, it's really good to have a naturopathic doctor on your team because there are all sorts of like troubleshooting that can help. Um, for example, um, something like warming sock treatment, which this is getting like a little outside of what we have time to talk about today, but um, there are herbs that can help. There are hydrotherapy, like kind of hot, cold water treatments that can help with sleep or to manage symptoms during a fever so that you can get through it without taking fever reducers. I get it, life happens, and if you don't have anyone you can consult with, you got to do what you got to do. But it is going to be more beneficial for your immune system to not take the fever reducers if you can get by without it. So. Um, but yeah, having, checking in with a naturopathic doctor. Um, I I know I said the warming sock treatment, but I don't think we're gonna have time to get through the class if I don't keep going, and it takes a lot of explaining. So um, I'm very sorry for the tease there. Um, so another example of inflammation kind of working like it's supposed to, you scrape your knee. The area becomes warm to the touch, red, swollen, and painful. Um, After a few days, it scabs over. A few days after that, the area is no longer red or warm or painful, and then the scab falls off and the skin underneath has healed. So, in this case, the redness is sort of like a mini fever, just like a little localized fever. And that is happening because there's more blood being sent to the area to bring in more oxygen to deliver the immune cells to the proper location. The heat, again, is increasing the temperature in that area in order to allow your immune cells to work more efficiently while preventing infection from taking hold. The pain is really, really important because it helps ensure that you don't re-injure the area. And so, for example, one of the terrible complications that happens with advanced diabetes is that the nerves in the extremities don't work very well anymore. There's a lot of numbness. And then if you get an injury there, oftentimes people don't know, they're not aware of it, and so they sort of re-injure it over and over again, and it gets infected, and then that's when people can need like a toe amputated or even a foot amputated. So having the ability to feel pain when you have an injury is like a gift, even though it doesn't feel like it at all at the time. The swelling is again like bringing in immune cells, bringing in blood to assist in the healing, and then the scab is your body stopping the bleeding um, to prevent blood loss and kind of covering up the area to protect it. So, with these two examples, essentially the answer is clear that inflammation itself is not bad. We absolutely need it, but we need to be able to turn it off when the healing is done. We actually would die if we couldn't make inflammation. Um, but it can get out of control in the wrong circumstances. So it's a matter of balance. Um, Another example to kind of drive the point home is research shows that if you take high dose fish oil or turmeric, two very anti-inflammatory things, during a flu, you will have fewer symptoms, but the flu will last longer. And so that's exactly demonstrating that without the inflammation, the flu sticks around. We don't get rid of it as well. So, what about chronic inflammation? So, chronic inflammation occurs when there's an imbalance in the body that favors that. So, the types of things that contribute to that imbalance are eating highly processed foods that are high in sugar and food additives, having leaky gut, and all of the many things that contribute to leaky gut, which eating highly processed foods, that's one of the things it does. Chronic infections, which there's many examples of that, but just to name a few, like Lyme disease, people can have like chronic reactivated Epstein-Barr virus, which is the virus that causes mono. Um, there are all sorts of other like tick-borne related infections. So those are just a couple, but there are others. Exposure to environmental toxicants contribute to and cause inflammation. High levels of chronic stress, not enough exercise, carrying extra weight in the belly. And belly fat actually does behave differently than fat stored in the hips and legs and elsewhere in the body. And it does actually produce more inflammatory chemicals than regular fat that's stored elsewhere. And then finally, nutrient deficiencies. So we actually need a whole bunch of specific nutrients to help manage and calm inflammation. And so without those, we tend to kind of get stuck in more of a pro-inflammatory state. So, conditions that are generally caused or worsened by chronic inflammation, um, it's most of the chronic um, health conditions. So, it'd almost be easier to name the ones that aren't. So, chronic pain, heart disease, diabetes, asthma, cancer, autoimmune conditions, allergies, stroke, migraine, osteoporosis, insomnia, depression, Alzheimer's disease, many, and most of the chronic health conditions that we're afflicted with in this country and really all over the world. And it does actually take many years of chronic inflammation to cause the above conditions. So even if you don't have any of those types of diseases currently, taking action now to kind of keep things in balance is really valuable. Um, let's see. I'm getting a little bit of background noise. Anyone who is not muted, if you don't mind muting yourself, that would be wonderful. Thank you. So, in chronic inflammation, um, there are small chemical messengers called cytokines, which we've like touched on a couple of examples in talking about the examples of the flu and healing from a scrape. And so those cytokines are produced by the immune system, and they cause the symptoms listed in the flu example. Um, so, for example, we talked about there's one called interleukin 1 in a cold or a flu, or more typically a flu, that will cause fever and that malaise, sick feeling. However, when it's chronically elevated, it causes depression or it contributes to depression. Of course, there are lots of reasons for depression. TNF alpha, which we talked about, contributing to low appetite, irritability, fever, fatigue, and weakness during a acute illness like the flu. When it's chronically elevated, it can like really, really contribute a lot to the inflammation in autoimmune conditions. And it can also drive anxiety when it's chronically elevated. And then a third example is interferon gamma, um, which causes pain. And that one is especially high in chronic inflammation and can really contribute to chronic pain. There are also anti-inflammatory cytokines whose job it is to kind of keep the balance in check and halt the inflammation once the injury is healed or once the infection is resolved. Um, a couple very important ones are interleukin 10 and TGF beta. Again, you don't need to learn these, but just know that there's a whole team of anti-inflammatory cytokines or chemical signals whose job it is to turn the inflammation back down. And so, we can do things to help encourage an anti-inflammatory effect to balance out excess inflammation. So one of the reasons we have a problem with too much inflammation in this country and large swaths of the world is because we tend to eat more inflammatory foods and less anti-inflammatory foods. So, for example, highly processed foods, trans fats, nitrates, all sorts of food additives and preservatives. Probably herbicide and pesticide exposures contributes to this. Excess salt, excess sugar, charring our food, so using cooking techniques that kind of cause a lot of caramelization or charring, and then not getting enough omega-3 fats. Um, just too little variety. So it's easy to end up eating mostly foods made out of corn, soy, wheat, dairy, and meat, and not enough of all the other foods. And so just the sheer lack of variety negatively impacts the microbiome and has other negative effects. Um, just high calorie, low nutrient foods, which a lot of the processed foods are. And then individual food intolerances. So, if someone is intolerant to dairy and they're still eating dairy, that's going to cause a lot of leaky gut, or, have a kind of immune reaction to eating corn and they're still eating corn. That can make a really big difference. And then also just eating really fast, not chewing very well, whatever we don't kind of thoroughly digest will be sort of broken down incompletely, fermented by bacteria in the wrong part of the gut, and will also contribute to leaky gut and other microbiome problems. I do want to touch a little bit on seed oils because it's a kind of a controversial subject and one that I have gotten wrong in the past. So there has, and this might just be something that you run across on social media or out there in the world, so I think it's useful to discuss. So there has long been a theory, and it was a theory I learned, over a decade ago, that omega-3 fats encourage the production of anti-inflammatory signaling molecules, and that omega-6 fats encourage the production of inflammatory signaling molecules. Omega-3 fats are found in fish and fish oil, cod liver oil, as an example, flaxseed, flax oil, walnuts, pumpkin seed, hemp seed, chia seed, and green vegetables and seaweed. And then omega-6 fats are found in grains and seed oils. And research has actually been mounting for years that, for the most part, this is not true. So the reason, like the theory made a lot of sense that, so seed oils are made up in large part or have a large amount of a certain compound in it called linoleic acid, which that's kind of the base ingredient that then gets converted into the inflammatory signaling molecules. So gets converted into arachidonic acid and then other inflammatory messengers. And whereas fish oil and omega-3s get converted into a series of anti-inflammatory signaling molecules. So the theory went if you ate more of the seed oils, then you get more inflammation just automatically. But the problem is, research does not bear that out. That's actually been kind of debunked in a whole bunch of different studies from a whole bunch of different sources. So this isn't like um, the seed oil companies doing their own research and being like, oh, it's fine. It's just like a whole bunch of universities and a whole bunch of um, like I think one of the research teams was actually funded by the competitor, by like a coconut oil brand who like would have really benefited from finding that seed oils were bad, and they found that they're not. Um, so it turns out that our bodies actually very tightly control which type of um, signaling molecules we make. And so it actually really doesn't seem to matter how much we eat of the seed oils. The body will only make as much inflammation as it wants to make based off of like all of these checks and balances. It is a problem to not get enough omega-3 oils, the type that we get from fish oil, because if we just don't even have the ingredients to make the anti-inflammatory signaling molecules, that's a problem. But having a lot of, say, um, like canola oil or something like that, some of these studies, they gave people boatloads. Like it was outrageous how much seed oils they had these people eat and oftentimes like cook with at high heat. And there was absolutely no sign of increased inflammatory signaling. So in case that's useful to you. That said, there probably are a couple like rare genetic conditions where people potentially do get increased inflammation with seed oils. So if you just throughout your life have found, I feel terrible, my joint pain is awful if I eat seed oils, that may be true for you. It's just not true for the majority of people. I will in my follow-up email send out a video that's going through a doctor going through all of this research in case you want to take a look at this. So if this is something you care about or specifically have wondered about, feel free to watch that video. And the couple exceptions to that, to what I was just speaking about, are consuming repeatedly deep fried oils does seem to increase inflammation. So eating fast food, not great. The oil that they're cooking the potatoes in has been heated and cooled and heated and cooled and heated and cooled a whole bunch of times. That does seem to increase inflammation. Not cooking at high heat at home where you just like heat the oil the one time, cook things in it and eat it. That does not seem to be a problem. And then the impact of eating those repeatedly heated seed oils may be worse for those with pre-existing heart disease. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, people with certain genetics, these are rare cases, respond to seed oils with more inflammation. So, takeaway is don't eat deep fried fast food, and otherwise, seed oils are probably fine for most people, and even if you cook with them. However, they aren't an essential food. There are lots of other options. So if you are concerned about it, it is okay to avoid them. It's not going to make you sick to not eat them. So, one note is that vegetables have minuscule amounts of fat in them. So eating lots of vegetables, ideally half your plate of vegetables, helps in part by helping you feel full with smaller intakes of grains and meats and other foods. Um, and the reason that fish is so high in omega-3 fats is because they have been eating all of this algae and, essentially vegetables and concentrating the tiny bits of omega-3 fats in those vegetables in their bodies. Grass-fed meat will have a little bit more omega-3 fats compared to omega-6 fats because the animal is eating all this grass and concentrating the tiny bits of omega-3 fats. So, you can get some different quality depending on the type of meat that you're choosing, for example. And then that's just why fish oil has so much more omega-3 fats than vegetables. Um, so other nutrients, we had briefly touched on nutrient deficiencies being a factor with inflammation. So, other nutrients that are very important: vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, and glutathione. Those are our body's main antioxidants. So, they help the body quench oxidative stress. Um, and then B12 and folate in the proper form, and this actually really depends on the person's genetics, helps reduce a certain type of inflammatory mediator called homocysteine. Other minerals like zinc and magnesium, as well as B vitamins, all play a role in helping a whole bunch of different processes in the body that can help balance inflammation as well. So that's kind of the food aspects. Any questions before we move on to leaky gut?
Yes, my I dropped off the Zoom. I got kicked off the Zoom. My phone kicked me off right
Okay.
when you were starting to, and I came back on just like 30 seconds to a minute
Oh,
later. But I missed a little piece I wanted to get. It was
yeah.
right when you were going into what causes chronic inflammation. And when I popped back on, I heard you saying something about belly fat. And so I missed anything before that.
Oh, got it. Okay. Um, so let's see. Let me just make sure I'm in the right section. Um, let's see. Okay. So, eating highly processed foods, high in sugar and food additives, leaky gut, and all of the things that contribute to leaky gut, which eating processed foods does that. Chronic infections, and that can include Lyme disease, Epstein-Barr virus, and many other things. Exposure to chemicals, environmental toxicants, high chronic stress, not enough exercise, and then carrying extra weight in the belly. And so the belly fat produces different chemical mediators that are more inflammatory than fat carried elsewhere in the body.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so leaky gut, also known as intestinal permeability, um, is a really, really big factor with inflammation. Many of the triggers of inflammation that we've already talked about, they cause it because, or at least in part because they cause leaky gut. So I'm just gonna do a brief overview of what is meant to happen in the intestines and then what goes wrong with leaky gut. So, the lining of the intestines is meant to act as this very selective barrier between the food that you eat and the rest of your body, and between the microbiome and the rest of your body, essentially between what is not you and what is you. And so, the food that you're taking in is meant to be digested down into its component parts. So, protein from meat or from beans, for example, is meant to be broken all the way down into amino acids, which are like tiny little protein building blocks. And then carbohydrates are meant to be broken all the way down into glucose um, or fructose, and then fats into very tiny emulsified fat droplets. And once the foods are broken all the way down to that level, they no longer have uh, any ability, or our immune system can no longer identify them as the food that they started out as. At this point, they're just like unidentifiable protein building blocks or carbohydrate building blocks, etc. And then they are absorbed through these very specific transporters into the bloodstream. And then your body can do what it needs to do with them. So it can take those building blocks up and use them to build your muscle, or, you know, run your brain on that glucose, or manufacture enzymes to do all of the many processes in our body. Um, and just to do repair, to nourish, etc. So essentially, digesting and absorbing food is the process by which things that are not you are taken into your body and become you. Importantly, the immune system really doesn't like finding like non-self things in the bloodstream. And so things being broken down very thoroughly is an important step for many reasons, both so we can use the things appropriately, but also so our immune system doesn't think that there's an infection going on. So when that careful selective barrier of the lining of the gut gets disrupted, um, bigger gaps open up between the cells, and that allows little bits of protein and bacteria to leak into the body, into the bloodstream. Um, that doesn't mean there's an infection, but the immune system essentially interprets it as an infection because now the bits of food are now recognizable as the food that it was, potentially. And then there's bits of bacteria as well. And so the immune system responds like it's an infection. Um, and and it produces inflammatory chemicals to essentially fight the infection, but it isn't an infection. And so this just kind of keeps going on. There's no like resolution to the process unless you remove the things that are causing leaky gut and, the gut lining is able to repair. So many of the things that we're about to discuss that cause inflammation, they do this at least in part by irritating and inflaming the gut lining such that the kind of the gaps open up in the otherwise like contiguous sheet of cells that would be the lining of the intestines. So, other sources of chronic inflammation, there are a lot. So, you can reference the recording of this class if that's useful to you to, revisit any of this. But for example, in the mouth, so gut inflammation starts in the mouth, or we will start at the top of the digestive tube. So, periodontal disease, cavities, and root canals all are really major and often overlooked sources of chronic inflammation. In the small intestine, we can have small overgrowth of bacteria, or it's called SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. In the large intestine, we can have too much of the wrong types of bacteria or overgrowth of yeast, or we can have intestinal parasites that increase inflammation. We can have chronic infections, and the ones I had listed before were Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases, and Epstein-Barr virus. But there are others. Just given a couple examples here. Exposure to mercury from dental amalgams or eating too much seafood, cooking in Teflon pans. Even like one tiny little scratch of the Teflon releases just like tens of thousands of particles of inflammatory chemicals. Plastic exposure, which is so hard to avoid. But plastics in our seafood, in our table salt, in our bottled water, and food stored and microwaved in plastic causes leaky gut, causes inflammation, causes hormone disruption. Air pollution, including wildfire smoke, unfiltered water, chemicals in makeup and body care products, chemicals in home cleaning products, scented candles, air fresheners, and dryer sheets, excess EMF exposure, and then cigarette smoke, including secondhand smoke. And then there are certain genetics that predispose to increased inflammation. So, for example, the MTHFR gene mutations make people who have them have a harder time activating B12 and folate, so two of the B vitamins, and that increases inflammation. And then there are some other examples as well that lipoprotein A is sort of a genetically mediated type of the bad cholesterol that especially increases risk of blood clots, things like stroke and heart attack. So, some people are going to have a little bit of genetic predisposition. That's not a sentence. It just means that optimizing the other areas is really important. And then excessive exercise actually causes increased inflammation. So exercise, absolutely fantastic. But if you're pushing really hard, running to exhaustion, kind of the joints are hurting after exercising, um, it can be too much and it can actually promote more of an inflammatory state in the body. Too little sleep. We do a lot of our repair during sleep. And so if we're not getting at least kind of bare minimum 6 hours, depending on the person and the stage of life, but probably more like 7 to 8 for most people, um, that's going to be a contributing factor. Getting a sunburn. Typically that's like a once in a while thing, but avoiding it as much as possible is really important. And then also not getting enough sun. So having low vitamin D, which of course you can take a supplement, but getting sun exposure is actually fantastic. You just have to avoid the sunburn part. There are all sorts of benefits to daylight and sun exposure that we can't get from a pill, a vitamin D pill. Um, but you just want to get like 20 minutes in the sun and then put on your sun shirt or your sunscreen or etc. And then stress, which there's so many factors, loneliness, isolation. Um, I just attended a continuing education seminar that went into loneliness as such a massive factor in cardiovascular disease. And the talk was really encouraging all of the doctors in attendance to make assessing loneliness a vital sign at every visit and giving every single person a prescription for um, making connections and finding ways to build more community, to dance, to get out and um, be around humans. Really, really crucial. Work stress, deadlines, and then just being kind of stuck in a state of fear or jealousy or anger or bitterness. It's obviously so normal to have emotions, but when we get really stuck and hung up there and can't leave that place, that can be a source of major stress and worsen inflammation. So, gonna kind of change gears a little bit. If there are any more questions about that section, now is a good time to ask. So, the adrenal glands are our stress response system. They're little glands that sit on top of the kidneys, kind of in the back of the body, and they produce cortisol, among other hormones. Cortisol is our kind of slow burning stress hormone, and it is a steroid, actually, just like cortisone, for example, like as in cortisone cream. So cortisone cream is an anti-inflammatory cream used on eczema, very commonly to suppress the inflammation and make the eczema go away. And so our bodies make a very similar compound called cortisol, and typically we should make a burst of it every morning, and then the levels should decline pretty steeply after that, drop off throughout the afternoon, and then be very low at night by the time we need to go to bed or want to go to bed. And so that spike of cortisol in the morning actually helps suppress inflammation, just like cortisone cream does, except this is kind of systemically circulated in our bloodstream. And it also helps kill autoimmune cells and it helps keep our inflammation in check. So, and then it's meant to be low at night because if it were high at night, we would feel kind of wired and jittery and wouldn't be able to sleep. And then also, cortisol suppresses melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. And so if our cortisol was still elevated at night, we wouldn't be able to have a rise of melatonin that helps us go to sleep. And actually, melatonin has all sorts of anti-inflammatory qualities as well. So we really want both. We want the spike of cortisol in the morning, and then we want the spike of melatonin at night. With chronic stress, with shift work especially, we can no longer get that normal cortisol spike in the morning, or we can start getting wacky spikes at other times. Sometimes it will be low in the morning and high at night, for example. And so then we are missing that anti-inflammatory burst, and then probably also our sleep's getting disrupted. Um, it's a really big topic. This could probably be a class in and of itself, so I'm not going to go into much more detail. But if you have a lot of sleep problems or like chronic anxiety or chronic fatigue, that would be a good thing to like come in and get some specific care, sorting that out. And there's a lot that can be done for this. But for now, just naming that as another factor with inflammation, when there's a lot of history of chronic stress or shift work, etc. And then finally, the lymphatic system is can be a site of a chronic inflammatory process. So the lymphatic system is a separate circulatory system from the blood, and it's the circulatory system for our immune system. It sort of runs parallel to the blood vessels. Let's see. Um, Oh gosh, yeah, I'm so sorry. Uh, Getting a comment about being woken up multiple times in the night for 3 years. That's so hard, and that's yeah, something I think all parents go through. And yeah, what can you do at that point? Um, do as much as you can to support all these other areas, I guess. Yeah. Um, so when the lymph fluid that's passing through these little delicate lymph vessels gets thickened or clogged, that can cause immune dysfunction and worsen chronic inflammation. So, for example, after healing from a wound, the inflammatory cells that had shown up on that site to do the healing, they should be able to be swept away through the lymphatic system, and that's part of halting the inflammation once it's no longer needed. If the lymph is thick or blocked, or there's excess scar tissue, or the person's dehydrated, or they're not able to move that area, then that can contribute to um, the immune cells not being able to leave when they're done, when they should be done with their healing process. Um, and so that can contribute to a chronic low level inflammation in the area of an old injury. And so, using movement, stretching, lymphatic therapy, staying hydrated, all those sorts of things are really, really helpful for that type of inflammation. So there are some tests that can be really useful. So if this is something that you're wondering, like, do I have a problem with chronic inflammation? Maybe you have some of these symptoms. Um, there are some tests that can be really useful to check. None of them are specific for a certain disease. They just tell you if there's overall excess inflammation present. So they can be helpful when working with or helping to identify an autoimmune disease or cancer. Um, but they're often normal in a lot of chronic diseases because the inflammation is not high enough to show up on these tests. That's really worth checking. And sometimes there is just this kind of hidden low level inflammation, and finding it is really useful. And then we can figure out, like, is it from dental infections or chronic periodontal disease? Is it from food reactions? So the first one is called HSCRP, which stands for high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And that will be highly elevated during an acute infection like a flu. So you don't really, it's not going to be very useful to check when you're acutely ill, because of course it will be high, and then it will drop back down typically once you're feeling better. However, it can be chronically elevated with those things that I just talked about, and some other like exposure to environmental toxins as well. And so I check that on yearly labs. I think it's a really, really useful thing to check on. It's associated with higher risk of heart disease, for example. And then homocysteine. So that one will be elevated in people with certain genetics that affect how they process B12 and folate, or in someone who's just not getting enough B12 or folate. Erythrocyte sedimentation rate, or ESR, is a little bit similar to the C-reactive protein, the first one that I listed, but they are different, and I'll often run those together if I'm really worried about chronic inflammation, or especially an autoimmune condition. And that's essentially like, how do the red blood cells clump together? And they will clump differently when there's more inflammation. There is urine PCR testing, which is like looking for the DNA of different hidden infections, or kind of advanced antibody testing for Lyme disease and co-infections. Um, and so, if that's something that is under suspicion, that can be really useful. Let's see, I think there's another question. How does high cortisol affect inflammation or cause other issues? So, high cortisol, while it does help suppress inflammation, if it's high too much of the time, um, some of the things it's doing are trying to help prepare you to respond to a threat, essentially, or just respond to a stressful situation. So it mobilizes, it raises your blood sugar, and that's useful in a really a sudden, quick, short, stressful situation, because if you have more blood sugar around, it helps power your muscles, it helps power your brain. But if your cortisol is chronically elevated, that can contribute to blood sugar problems like diabetes. Um, and having that high blood sugar all the time, as well as one of the other effects of cortisol, is promoting weight gain. It actually kind of tells your cells to put on weight, sort of like store up for winter. Um, it actually can weaken the connective tissue long term. So high cortisol in the long run can kind of contribute to joint wear and tear. So those are some of the main ones that I think about. It's a complex signaling molecule, but those are some of the things. All right, so a couple other tests. I will often do a functional stool test if the person is having a lot of gut issues to help identify both leaky gut, like there is actually a marker called zonulin that can help identify leaky gut, whether those junctions between the cells in the small intestine are kind of opening up, and then also can look for hidden infections in the gut, such as small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a different test. The stool test will tell you about pathogenic bacteria, um, uh, whether there's any trace blood, whether you're making enough digestive enzymes. It gives a lot of really useful information. And then there is testing for both heavy metals. You can just test the blood, but that's more like right at this moment, do you have increased exposure to heavy metals? Whereas there's a type of urinary testing that can look at body burden of heavy metals. So someone where we're wondering, like maybe have they had excess exposure in the past that's built up in their body? We can test for that. We can test for non-metal chemicals in the urine, and then we can test the saliva for cortisol levels. And we can have the person like collect their saliva 4 or 5 times throughout the day and see like what is it doing? Is it low in the morning and spiking at night, for example? So that can be really, really useful. So what do we do about it? The solution is twofold. Make diet and lifestyle choices that balance inflammation, and then identify any root causes and treat them. So the diet and lifestyle stuff is just like, as much as possible, everybody should do some of these things, or as many of these things as they can to help balance inflammation. The root cause stuff varies from person to person quite significantly. So, for example, one person might be using a whole bunch of cleaning products in their home that are quite toxic. And so they're getting a lot of exposure there, and, microwaving their lunch in a plastic container every day. maybe they have low vitamin D, maybe they have an old inflamed root canal, and maybe they eat a lot of fast food. And so that would, be a very specific set of causes for that person, whereas another person might have Lyme disease or, might have rheumatoid arthritis, that they have a very strong like family history propensity to autoimmune conditions. Um, maybe there was a water damage event in their home and there's mold that they're having to deal with. So it can be so different from person to person, and identifying those root causes and addressing those directly is really crucial. So, let's see, that uh, kind of covers covers a couple examples. I had more of them, but we're running over, so I'm gonna shorten that part a little bit. Um, all right, let's see. So that's where coming in for a naturopathic consult is really useful if you are just not sure where to start. Maybe ask your primary care physician to run the C-reactive protein and the homocysteine and see what comes up. And then if you're needing further support, schedule a consult and we can dive deep on whatever areas need to be addressed. The good news is that you can start to notice significant improvements in mood and energy, pain and cognition very quickly, like within 3 to 7 days of reducing inflammation, if you're able to find the cause. So, for example, someone who is eating a lot of foods with trans fats in them and stops, that's going to reduce the interleukin 6 and C-reactive protein like within 3 to 7 days. It's very fast. If you're not getting much omega-3 fats in your diet and you add them in, that can very quickly reduce a couple of the other inflammatory mediators, that interleukin 1 and TNF alpha. And then if your blood sugar is really high, eating a lot of sugar perhaps, decreasing, switching to a type of eating that keeps your blood sugar much lower, that will also reduce a bunch of these inflammatory mediators very quickly. Um, and then healing leaky gut. While it's a bit of a process, however, the gut lining heals very quickly. So if you remove sources of irritation and inflammation, it's constantly turning over. It's the lining of the gut is the tissue in the body that has the fastest healing time of any of our areas of our body. So there too, there's a lot of hope. If we reduce the causes of inflammation and the causes of leaky gut, the gut can start to heal very quickly. That said, it can take, you want to keep at it for a while, for probably at least a month, probably a couple months, but the healing will start almost instantaneously. So, we've kind of touched on these in a different way, but non-dietary ways to reduce inflammation, building community, so important. Reducing exposure to environmental chemicals like plastics, air pollution, having a good water purifier and air purifier in your home if you're able to. Addressing mold. I do teach a class on that, so if you have any mold issues that you know about in your car or your home, definitely look for that class. Just slowing down while eating, chewing thoroughly, eating in a relaxed state, staying hydrated, getting sleep. So many of these are really basic things, but they are really profound and foundational. Make sure you're getting enough of those vitamins and minerals that we discussed. And then a few additional things are CBD is very anti-inflammatory. We have a really high quality organic third-party tested CBD line that's free of heavy metals and pesticides, herbicides, etc. I will share a link to that in case that's useful for you. Let's see, I put that in the chat. And then turmeric, you can absolutely add that to your food, cook with it, make golden milk, turmeric tea. And also, there are supplements that are kind of higher potency. And so that can be really useful if, in the case of chronic joint pain, for example. I'm also sharing a link to some of the products that I'm just touching on briefly. Good quality fish oil that contains at least 1,000 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA. It's very, very useful. You have to look at the back of the label to determine and kind of do a little calculation, like the EPA line and the DHA line, add those up and make sure that's at least 1,000. And talk to your doctor before taking higher doses than that, but that's typically safe for most people. Um, we carry a protein powder that is just like, it's really useful because you're getting some protein. It tastes pretty good, and it has therapeutic doses of like 5 to 7 different anti-inflammatory supplements in there. It's called InflammaPro. So that is in that link. That can be a useful kind of in the meantime while working on other things to reduce inflammation. And then quercetin and bromelain are very anti-inflammatory. Quercetin, especially, well, both are known for helping with allergies, but they can help with joint pain and other inflammatory conditions as well. Thank you, Marcy. Sorry to be running so far over. Have a good evening. Um, all right. Well, we pretty much covered it. Inflammation is not good or bad, but we do need balance. And we've gone over a number of factors to pay attention to when looking at this. I will just end saying thank you so much for being here. We do have a discount code, so if you wanted to try any of the products listed, you can use this code, and I'll put this in the follow-up email as well, for 20% off those products. And then if you want to come in for an electrolymphatic therapy treatment, which is incredibly helpful for stimulating and circulating the lymph, or for a naturopathic consult or any of our other services, for the next week, we're offering $30 off. You don't have to come in the next week, but you have to call or reach out to book it within the next week to get the $30 off. So that same code works for that. So that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for being here and for your great questions. And if anyone has any last questions, let me know.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here, Susan.
Very informative. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we're closing it out. I hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Take care.